Off the rocky coast of Maine, where the Atlantic pounds against jagged cliffs and fog rolls in so thick you can taste the salt in the air, there stands a lighthouse that has seen more than 2 centuries of storms, shipwrecks, and whispered tragedy. Seguin Island Light, built in 1795 at the order of President George Washington himself, was meant to be a beacon of safety for sailors navigating the treacherous waters near the mouth of the Kennebec River. But for all its noble purpose, Seguin has a darker story etched into its walls, a story that locals still tell with lowered voices. Seguin Island is small, just 64 acres of windswept grass, rocky shoreline, and the tall white cylinder of the lighthouse. The only way to reach it is by boat, and even on calm days, the crossing can be tricky. Once you arrive, the sense of isolation is immediate. The nearest town is miles of churning ocean away, and when the fog comes in, it swallows the horizon until all that's left is the sound of waves smashing against the rocks. For much of its history, Seguin was manned by keepers who lived on the island year-round with their families. It was a lonely post, but vital. The light had to be kept burning through every season, through freezing winters and summer gales. In the 19th century, there were no radios, no quick supply runs. Once you were stationed here, you were cut off from the mainland for weeks at a time. And that's where the trouble began. The most enduring legend of Seguin is the story of its last full-time keeper, or, more accurately, his final, desperate days. In the mid-1800s, a young keeper arrived with his wife, full of optimism about their new life on the island. But as the months passed, the isolation began to weigh heavily. The wife, bored and restless, longed for company and entertainment. There was nothing here but the gulls, the wind, and the endless churn of the ocean. The keeper, hoping to cheer her up, ordered a piano from the mainland. No small feat for such a remote place. The instrument was delivered by boat and hauled up the steep incline to their quarters. At first, it seemed to work. She played for hours, filling the tiny house with music. But there was a problem. The piano came with only one sheet of music, one song. And day after day, week after week, she played the same piece over and over, until the notes became like a dripping faucet in the keeper's mind, relentless, maddening. As the winter deepened, the fog settled thick around the island. The keeper's temper grew short. Visitors to the lighthouse in later years claimed that by February, his face was pale and drawn, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. And then, one stormy evening, the music stopped. What happened next has been retold so many times that the line between fact and folklore has blurred completely. The story goes that, in a fit of rage and madness, the keeper took an axe to the piano, splintering the wood and silencing the melody forever. But he didn't stop there. Consumed by some unnameable darkness, he turned on his wife, killing her, and then took his own life. When the relief crew finally arrived weeks later, they found the lighthouse abandoned, the light extinguished, and 2 bodies in the keeper's quarters. No official record confirms the murders. The lighthouse board's logs for that year are missing, a detail that only fuels speculation. Some suggest the story was fabricated to explain the sudden reassignment of keepers, or as a cautionary tale about the dangers of isolation. Others believe every word, pointing to the strange events that have happened at Seguin ever since. Fishermen passing near the island on foggy nights claim to hear faint piano music drifting across the water, the same simple melody played over and over. Visitors who stay in the keeper's house have reported waking to the sound of footsteps pacing the hall, only to find the rooms empty. More than one overnight guest has left abruptly in the middle of the night, unwilling to explain why. In the 20th century, when the lighthouse was automated and the keeper's role ended, Seguin should have grown quieter. But the stories persisted. Coast Guard crews stationed temporarily on the island have spoken of doors opening and closing on their own, the scent of pipe tobacco in rooms where no one has smoked in decades, and the unsettling feeling of being watched from the top of the staircase. One officer swore that during a routine inspection, he heard a piano playing from the parlor, even though the building had been empty for years. Skeptics dismiss it all as the power of suggestion, the mind playing tricks in a place so isolated and steeped in legend. But the details are too consistent to ignore, too many witnesses from too many decades. Even those who don't believe in ghosts admit that Seguin has a presence, a weight in the air that you feel the moment you step onto the island. The wind carries more than just salt and spray. It carries history and maybe something else. Today, Seguin Island Light is maintained by a preservation group. In the summer months, tourists can take a boat out, climb the spiral stairs, and look out across the Atlantic just as the keepers once did. It's beautiful in the sunlight, the water sparkling blue, the gulls wheeling overhead. But if you come late in the day, when the fog begins to creep in and the horizon fades, the mood shifts. The lighthouse looms taller, the air grows still, and you might just catch the faintest echo of music, a single, haunting melody that refuses to fade. Whether the tale of the keeper's last steps is truth or legend, Seguin Island remains a place where the past lingers, where the line between reality and ghost story blurs with every gust of wind and every note that drifts out across the sea. Fog is not weather on Seguin, it's architecture. It builds rooms where there were none, swallows distances, and furnishes the air with sounds that don't belong to any living thing. If part one was the story visitors hear from docents and fishermen, this is the layer beneath, the part you notice only when the tide of noise recedes and the island exhales. The earliest account of the music that we can put a date to isn't romantic at all. It's practical and terse, the way working notes always are. In July 1932, a lobsterman out of Popham scribbled in his wheelhouse log, "Thick. Horn at 2 blasts. Heard piano? Like from a house window. No house." He underlined the last 2 words twice. That log still exists, kept in a family Bible until the paper went soft and salty at the edges. No one disputes he heard something. They only argue about what it was. Coast Guard crews assigned to Seguin in the 1950s learned the island's moods by instrument. The foghorns lowing, the diesel generator's steady thrum, the brass tick of the clockwork lens. One electrician, stationed here for a maintenance stint in '59, swore the generator faltered for a breath, and the moment the island fell quiet, a melody stepped in to fill the vacuum. Like a parlor tune, he said decades later. Not church, not a jig, something small, stubborn. He quit smoking that week because he started smelling pipe tobacco where there were no pipes. Another detail old-timers mention without looking you in the eye. The rational explanations are easy to assemble, and frankly, good storytelling demands we give them space. Sound travels differently over cold water and through dense air. Inversions bend it like a lens. A buoy's bell can wander miles on a still night. Halyards rattle, rigging sings. Hinge pins hum. Even the wind can play an organ pipe if it finds the right seam in a window frame. A retired music teacher from Bath once came to Seguin with a decibel meter and a field recorder and left satisfied she'd cracked it. Partial tones stacking into something your brain labels piano because puzzles demand answers. But the island does not behave like a puzzle you solve and shelve. It behaves like an argument you keep having with yourself. In 1978, the preservation group that now oversees the light brought a caretaker couple out for the season. They painted trim, cataloged photographs, and pried open a small, swollen drawer in the keeper's desk. Inside lay a folded nap of paper, mildewed and browned, the title still legible through the foxing, The Maiden's Prayer. A simple salon piece from the 19th century, sentimental, repetitive, the kind of melody you could play to pass a winter afternoon 100 times over. The caretakers set it aside with the other ephemera. They did not tell docents. They did not want to be the kind of people who feed a ghost. That same summer, a thunderstorm chased a tour boat back to the mainland and left the island to the caretakers in fog. They both woke around too. He said footsteps. She said a pedal lifting and falling. They met on the landing of the spiral stair, breath held, listening. The room breathed too, in and out with the pulse of the beacon's ventilation. The foghorn, under maintenance that night, did not fire. In the quiet between their heartbeats, enough notes threaded together for each to recognize the awkward cadence of a beginner's right hand, the long, patient sustains of a left. When morning came, they joked it away. But they also found, beneath the basement stairs, a sliver of wood the size and shape of an ivory keytop. Yellowed, hairline cracked, smelling faintly of oil. They did not keep it. They walked it to the cliff and let the tide take it. If you want instruments and evidence, there are tapes. A hobbyist ham operator spent 3 nights camping on Seguin in the late 1990s. He recorded the horn, birds, gulls, and a dozen hours of nothing. On the last tape, at 3:11 a.m., a line of tone surfaces, 3 notes rising, 1 falling, then a pause, then the same figures again. The pattern degrades and is swallowed by wind, then returns, a little sharper, like someone moved closer to the microphone. He sent the cassette to a friend who ran it through spectral software. The friend said it looked like a harmonium. Then he said it looked like your brain looking for faces in the moon. Skeptics remind us the most famous facts of the Seguin legend are unprovable. No lighthouse board report of a murder-suicide survives. There is no cold ledger line to satisfy the modern appetite for documentation. It could all be a cautionary story about isolation, invented to give shape to death by accident or illness. And yet the story refuses to starve. It feeds on the small consistencies. The smell of kerosene in rooms that haven't held flame in decades, the print of a wet shoe on a dry stair, a single string of notes drifting through gaps in a sealed history. Locals who fish those shoals are practical by necessity. They do not delight in superstition. Superstition gets you killed if it keeps you out when you should have stayed in. But ask the old captains, and a few will admit to throttling back on a blind night, laying the boat in neutral, and hearing, plain as gulls, the thin sound of a parlor instrument working through something pretty and stubborn. You don't chase it, once said. You let it pass the way you let weather pass. Some sounds are not for following. There is a photograph the preservation group does not put on the wall because, when they tried, it would not hang straight. It's a flash shot from the 1970s of the parlor. Plank ceiling, rag rug, window black with night, the corner where a piano would fit and does not. In the glossy darkness of the window, there is a smear of light shaped like a hand. If you tilt the photo, you can make it vanish. If you tilt it the other way, it returns. The island's only road is a switchback of timbers, the tramway, that once hauled supplies from the cove to the lighthouse. Visitors ride it in summer and laugh, as they should, because you need levity before you go upstairs. The lantern room has the best view and the worst. You can see forever on a clear day. You can see nothing on a foggy night. Standing up there, you begin to understand the economy of a keeper's life: oil, wick, glass, time. And you can also understand how a single melody might become a ritual, something to measure loneliness against, something to keep the hours from unraveling. If there was only one piece of sheet music on the island, it would be the island's clock. Strike it and the distance answers. Not every haunting needs a ghost. Some need only repetition, grief, and a room with good acoustics. Still, when the fog presses in and the horn goes quiet for a maintenance cycle, the island feels like it has selected you for a lesson you're not sure you want. You wait, and in the waiting, you notice how many things on Seguin sound almost like other things. Gulls like laughter, halyards like hymns, a loose sash like a breath, the ocean itself like hundreds of fingers moving at once across ivory. There's a moment, always, when you think you hear it. Maybe you do. Maybe what you hear is not a piano but memory, thickened by fog, retelling itself in the only language it has. Either way, the effect is the same. You look toward the parlor, you look toward the water, you look toward the stair where a man once may have paused to listen. And you count a few notes in your head, just to see if they land the same way his did. By dawn, the island will have reset. The horn will resume. The gulls will bicker. The generator will purr. Tour boats will arrive. Laughter will bounce off white paint, and the docents will tell the careful version. But if you come back at dusk, if you let the last ferry go and you stay long enough for the slate to close over the sea, you may glimpse the edge of the older story, the one that keeps its time in measures, not minutes. The coast of Maine is full of lights, each with its ledger of wrecks and rescues, losses and small salvations. Seguin's ledger includes, perhaps, a single piece of music that will not quit. It's a simple thing, really. But simple things, repeated for years in a room that floats in fog, can become liturgy. Next, we leave the lighthouse, but not the water. Inland, a town sits beneath a lake, its streets and fences sleeping under the surface, and on hot August nights locals say lights rise through the weeds like lanterns from another century. Flagstaff is waiting. In the western mountains of Maine, just east of the Canadian border, there's a lake that locals treat with a kind of double vision. They see the water, of course, calm, slate blue in the mornings, rippling gold in the late light of summer. But they also see what's beneath it, or at least they remember. Because Flagstaff Lake wasn't always a lake. 75 years ago, it was a valley full of fields, houses, roads, and the town of Flagstaff itself. A place you could walk through, knock on doors, hear church bells. Now, it's a ghost town you can only reach by boat or by diving into the cold, dark water. The story of Flagstaff's disappearance begins in the 1940s, when Maine's Central Power Company announced its plan to build a massive hydroelectric dam downstream on the Dead River. The project would flood thousands of acres, creating a reservoir big enough to power much of the region. There was no avoiding it. The valley where Flagstaff sat would be underwater. Residents were given notice. They could dismantle their homes and move them, or leave them to be swallowed by the lake. Some salvaged what they could: doors, windows, whole barns hauled away on sleds in winter. Others left everything: furniture, photographs still on the walls, because the move would cost more than the house was worth. By 1950, the last families were gone. The dam gates closed, and slowly, the water rose. Officially, the state said the buildings were cleared, but locals knew better. Foundations, fence posts, sections of road, all of it disappeared beneath the flood. Some claimed entire houses went down intact, roofs barely breaking the surface in those first weeks. The old cemetery was moved to higher ground, but not all the graves. A few markers still lie at the lake's edge, tilted, half buried in weeds. Today, Flagstaff Lake stretches more than 20 miles across, its surface placid, almost too still. In summer, kayakers and anglers skim across it without thinking much about what's under them. But on certain dry years, when the water level drops, the lake gives up pieces of its past. Shingled rooftops poke through the shallows. A rusted bed frame leans in the mud. Old stone walls cut through the weeds like forgotten property lines. One year, during an extreme drought, a section of Main Street emerged, cracked pavement leading nowhere, lined with stumps where telephone poles once stood. It's during those low-water years that the stories start up again. Fishermen tell of snagging their lines on chimney bricks or the remains of a porch railing. Hikers say they've seen wagon wheels half buried in silt. And then there are the lights. The lights are always described the same way: a pale yellow or bluish glow, moving slowly upward from the lakebed at night, as if carried by an invisible hand. Sometimes there's just one, bobbing in the dark. Other times, several drift upward together, then vanish a few feet below the surface. No one's managed to photograph them clearly. The water distorts, the light scatters, but the witnesses are steady in their telling. They say it's like seeing lanterns from another century, rising to meet the air they once knew. Skeptics have an explanation ready: pockets of gas escaping from decomposing wood or organic material, catching the reflection of a distant porch light. Scientists mention bioluminescent microorganisms, though none are known to live here in numbers that could be seen with the naked eye. But those who've watched the lights say the movement is too deliberate. Gas bubbles don't pause, drift sideways, then sink again. There are other stories, too. Quieter, harder to dismiss. A woman from Stratton swears she heard church bells while fishing in the early morning mist, the sound faint but clear, coming from the middle of the lake where the church used to stand. An older man who kayaks the shoreline every summer says he's heard dogs barking from beneath the water. It's not a recording, he told a local reporter once. It's not an echo. It's coming from under you. You feel it in your feet. Divers have gone down, though few last long in the cold, murky water. Visibility drops to nothing within a few feet, and the silt clings to everything. Those who've tried say it's disorienting. You lose track of which way is up. One diver, in the late 1980s, claimed he brushed against something smooth and flat in the dark, followed it with his hand, and realized it was a pane of glass still set in a wooden frame. It felt like the house was watching me, he said later. He surfaced fast, abandoning the rest of the dive. Despite the lake's eerie reputation, it remains a place of quiet beauty. Loons nest along its shores. In autumn, the water reflects hillsides ablaze with red and gold. But the stillness has weight. On windless days, the surface can look like polished stone, and you can almost convince yourself it's not water at all, just a pane of glass laid over a sleeping town. Some locals refuse to fish here, not for fear of ghosts, but out of respect. You don't fish in someone's front yard, an old guide once said. He'd been a boy when the flooding happened and remembered watching the water swallow his neighbor's barn in slow motion. The roof went last, a triangle of shingles vanishing under a ripple. If you stand at the overlook near the dam on a calm evening, you can imagine it. The way the water crept in, the way the town dissolved without a fight. And if you stay long enough for the sun to drop and the fog to rise off the surface, you might see something else. Just a faint yellow glow, deep below, moving slowly upward, like a lantern in a hand you cannot see. Flagstaff Lake has no headstones for the lives it covered, no plaques for the streets it erased. Its memorials are the lights no one can explain, the bells no one can trace, the quiet that sits too heavily on a warm summer night. Some histories are written in books, others are written in the shape of the land, and some are written in water, where the only way to read them is to look down into the dark and wait. Flagstaff Lake is quiet in a way that tricks you. On still days, the kind of days when the mountains lie mirrored in the water and the air feels pinned in place, sound travels farther than you think. A conversation on the far shore can float to you whole. The bark of a dog echoes twice. But some sounds here don't behave like they should. They come from where there is no shore, no boat, no reason, from the center of the lake, where the streets of Flagstaff sleep beneath 30 feet of water. The stories about the voices start in the early 1960s, not long after the last of the construction crews left the dam. A pair of summer campers, paddling at dusk, claimed they heard a woman calling for help. They turned their canoe toward the sound, but found nothing. No swimmer, no overturned boat, just ripples spreading across the glassy surface. When they got back to camp, they learned no one had been out on the lake that evening. Their counselor told them the sound must have carried from the highway miles away. "Sound bounces here," he said. But the campers swore the voice came from the water itself. By the 1970s, fishermen were telling their own versions. One man from Eustis said he was trolling for trout when he heard what he thought were children playing. Laughter, splashes, the high calls of a game. But there was no boat, no one swimming. "It stopped all at once," he said, "like somebody shut a door." That phrase, "like somebody shut a door," turns up again and again in these accounts. Not a fade, not a drift, but an abrupt, deliberate end. Divers talk about the voices, too, though they rarely share their experiences outside of tight circles. One, a former Navy man, went down on a late summer afternoon when the water was warmest. Visibility was maybe 5 feet, and the silt clung to his mask. About 20 minutes in, as he hovered near what he thought was the roofline of a collapsed barn, he heard muffled speech. Not the gurgle of air from another diver, words. He couldn't make them out, but the cadence was human and close. When he surfaced, he found his partner still in the boat, adjusting his gear. No one else was on the lake. The Navy man refused to dive Flagstaff again. There's a practical explanation for some of it. Underwater acoustics are unpredictable. Sound travels faster in water than in air, and it refracts around obstacles in strange ways. Conversations from shore can appear to come from beneath you. An outboard motor can sound like a voice if it's far enough away. But the people who've heard the Flagstaff voices aren't talking about quick bursts or random noises. They describe tone, emotion, sometimes even words. In 1984, a writer for the Bangor Daily News interviewed a local guide who claimed to have heard an entire hymn rising from the water one Sunday morning. "It was an old one," he said. "Something my grandmother used to hum when she shelled peas." He couldn't remember the name, but he was sure of the melody. "It came up through the hull of my boat," he told the reporter. "Not from the air, from below." The article ran in a small human interest column and was quickly forgotten, except by those who had heard something similar. Some accounts are stranger still. In the summer of 1999, 2 teenage cousins swam out from a picnic spot on the eastern shore. They were halfway to a buoy when they both stopped, treading water. One asked the other, "Did you hear that?" They agreed it sounded like someone saying their names, one after the other, in a low, steady voice. They swam back fast and didn't go into the lake again that season. And then there's the night fisherman who ties his skiff to the same half-submerged maple stump every July. He says the voices only come when the water is dead calm and the moon is thin. Sometimes they're hushed, like people talking in the next room. Sometimes they're frantic, overlapping, as if a crowd is trying to be heard at once. He doesn't move when it happens. He just keeps his hands on the gunnels, listening, until the sound cuts off. Skeptics point to Flagstaff's drowned infrastructure as a possible cause. Beneath the water lie hollow spaces, basements, barns, culverts, where currents and temperature shifts could create vibrations. These might mimic certain frequencies our brains interpret as speech. It's the same phenomenon that makes wine through a crack in a window sound like a whistle. But even the skeptics admit they can't explain the moments when the words seem specific, directed. One autumn, during a severe drought, the water level dropped low enough to expose the foundation of the old town hall. A group of locals came to see it, walking the damp, cracked earth where the street once ran. Among them was an elderly woman who had grown up in Flagstaff before it was flooded. She stood near the foundation for a long time, then told the others she could hear her father's voice, as clear as if he were calling her in for supper. "He's been gone 30 years, she said quietly, "but I'd know that voice anywhere." Flagstaff Lake draws people for its beauty, the mirrored mountains, the autumn color, the quiet. But for some, the draw is deeper. They come listening, hoping to catch even a hint of what lies beneath. And maybe that's what keeps the voices alive, the listening. In a place where an entire town sleeps underwater, maybe silence is the anomaly, and sound is the memory of all that was lost. On the stillest nights, when the wind drops and the stars burn white above the black water, the lake seems to hold its breath. And if you're patient, if you let your own breathing slow until you can hear the blood in your ears, something else might rise to meet you. A call, a laugh, a song. Just don't expect it to stay. Here, as in the rest of Flagstaff's drowned streets, the past speaks only long enough to remind you it's still there, and then it shuts the door. Drive northwest from Augusta, and the road narrows, trading gas stations for pine shadows and the smell of lake water. Manchester, Maine, is a small town of quiet back roads, hemmed in by Messalonskee Lake to the east and the rolling farm country to the west. North Manchester, as locals call it, is little more than a cluster of houses, a church, and a few winding dirt lanes that lead toward the older, forgotten parts of town. One of those lanes, barely wide enough for a truck, leads to a granite outcrop in a clearing no bigger than a front yard. In the middle of that stone shelf lies the shape that's been drawing uneasy attention for 2 centuries, a human footprint, pressed into solid granite as if it were wet clay. 5 distinct toes, an arch, the curve of a heel. Locals call it the devil's footprint. If you pour water into it on a dry August day, it doesn't drain. In January, it's the last spot to freeze. The lichen and moss that creep across the surrounding ledge stop dead at its rim, as if something invisible keeps them back. There's no sign pointing you here, no plaque. Just a stone in the woods and a story that's been retold enough times to become part of the landscape. The earliest written mention appears in Kennebec County Surveyor's notes from 1831, marking it simply as boundary by the foot. But the oral history is older. In one version, the town's first minister was walking back to the parsonage from the old North Manchester meeting house on a brutally hot Sunday in the early 1800s when he was joined by a stranger. The man was well-dressed, with polished boots despite the dusty road, and his voice carried an accent no one could place. The 2 men talked about providence, fate, and bargains. Near the granite ledge, the stranger stopped and offered the minister a deal: rain for the parched fields in exchange for leaving his mark on the land. The minister refused. The stranger smiled, stepped forward, and pressed his foot into the solid granite like it was soft mud. "You'll remember," he said, before turning down the road toward what is now the wooded shoreline of Lake Cobbessecantee. That evening, a thunderstorm broke the drought. In 1811, church records make a cryptic note about superstitious traffic near the stone, warning parishioners not to gather for charms and cures. This suggests people had already started visiting the site to leave offerings, pins, coins, small bundles of herbs, in hopes of warding off illness or bad luck. Even into the early 20th century, locals whispered that stepping in the footprint when you were angry or grieving could invite disaster. Geologists have their own explanation. Glacial scouring and weathering created the depression, which just happens to resemble a human foot. Maine's granite is full of odd formations, but even the scientists admit the shape is unusually crisp, with proportions uncannily close to an adult man's bare foot. And that's before you get to the odd reports: dogs that refuse to cross the ledge, compass needles that hesitate within a few feet of the print, and the persistent claim that the stone inside the footprint stays slightly warmer than the rock around it. The old North Manchester parsonage, half a mile down the road, carried its own unlucky reputation. Built in the early 1800s, it burned to the ground after a lightning strike in the 1890s. Survivors claimed they'd heard heavy footsteps on the roof just moments before the strike. Letters saved in the Kennebec Historical Society mention the footprint more than once. In one, a pastor's daughter describes waking to find a wet, bare footprint on her windowsill after a rainless night. Today, the footprint is still there, weathered but intact. The woods have reclaimed the road, and the old meeting house is gone, but the ledge remains open to the sky. Hikers who come across it often photograph it, though the images never seem to capture the strange precision of the shape. Some locals still avoid it, stepping around the stone without breaking stride. Others can't resist standing in it, testing the legend. A few say they've felt a brief, vertigo-like drop, as if the ground shifted under them. Nothing dramatic, just enough to make the heart catch. In a town as small as Manchester, stories like this last because the place itself lasts. There's no tourist pull here, no roadside attraction to polish the mystery into something safe. Just a footprint in stone, older than anyone alive, holding rainwater, resisting moss, and waiting for the next person curious or careless enough to step into it. The old parsonage of North Manchester once stood just a half-mile south of the Devil's Footprint, on what is now an overgrown path that barely shows in summer. If you follow it in early spring, when the snowmelt has flattened the grass, you can still see where the foundation sat, a rectangle of granite blocks, moss filling the seams, lilac bushes marking what used to be the front yard. In its day, it was a tidy white clapboard house, built around 1810 to serve the ministers of the North Manchester Meeting House. By the time it burned to the ground in the summer of 1897, it had already gathered a reputation for strange misfortune. The stories say it began after the first minister, Reverend Amos Cutter, refused the stranger's bargain at the granite ledge, the same encounter that gave the Devil's Footprint its name. His letters, preserved at the Kennebec Historical Society, show a careful man, quick to dismiss superstition. Yet in a letter dated November 1812, he writes to a fellow minister in Winthrop, "I fear my house is not as it should be. There are steps in the upper hall at night, and the lamp gutters though the oil be full. The children complain of tapping on the glass, though the weather is still." The first death came in 1824, when Cutter's infant daughter was found cold in her cradle, though the fire in the hearth had burned all night. Parish records note only an infant taken in the night, but later ministers' wives whispered that her tiny footprints were seen in the frost on the window inside her room. Over the next decades, every family that lived in the parsonage suffered some quiet tragedy. 2 children drowned in Messalonsky Lake, a young minister collapsed during a sermon and never rose again, and 1 family lost their barn to fire after lightning struck a single iron hinge on the loft door. A visiting cousin who stayed one summer in the 1850s claimed she awoke to the sound of someone pacing in the attic, deliberate, heavy steps. But when she lit her lamp, the space above her was empty and still. By the 1870s, the parsonage had a pattern that people recognized but didn't name aloud. Babies born there often failed to thrive, animals kept on the property grew skittish, and ministers rotated out faster than in other towns. More than 1 clergyman requested transfer to Augusta or Hollowell after only a year. The final minister to live in the old house was Reverend Elijah Frost. In the summer of 1897, a series of thunderstorms swept through Kennebec County. On the night of August 12th, lightning struck the parsonage chimney. Neighbors, running from nearby houses, later said they saw an orange glow in the upstairs windows before the strike, as if lamps had been lit in every room. The fire took the building in under an hour. The only surviving piece of the structure was the granite doorstep, which locals moved to the churchyard for safekeeping. That doorstep now lies half-buried near the back of the North Manchester Church, its edges worn, a faint black stain in one corner. In 1935, a WPA folklore collector noted that older residents warned children not to stand too long on the stone or speak ill of the minister while near it. She also recorded a curious detail. The doorstep was measured against the Devil's Footprint, and the length matched exactly from heel to toe. Today, The site of the parsonage is just a tangle of brush and fieldstone, but hikers who find it sometimes report an odd hush in the air. No birdsong, no wind in the pines, just the faint scent of wood smoke where no fire has burned in more than a century. A few claim to have heard footsteps on the old path, keeping pace with them until they step back onto the main road. Whether the misfortunes were the result of coincidence, bad luck, or something carried from that granite ledge down to the parsonage, the pattern was real enough to be remembered. In Manchester, some places are left alone, not because anyone truly believes they're cursed, but because history has already made up its mind. And in North Manchester, history is patient. At the far northern tip of Maine, just a few miles from the Canadian border, sits the quiet shell of what was once one of the most critical military installations in the United States. Loring Air Force Base in Limestone was a Cold War stronghold, home to nuclear-capable bombers, massive fuel depots, and the infrastructure to keep them hidden, maintained, and ready to launch. When it opened in 1953, it was the largest strategic air command base east of the Mississippi. Thousands of airmen and their families lived in neat rows of base housing, shopped at the commissary, and drove past the sprawling runways that could handle the biggest aircraft in the world. Above ground, Loring looked like any other post-war Air Force facility. But below ground, that's where the stories begin. Locals have long whispered about a network of tunnels beneath the base, service corridors, storage vaults, even entire rooms designed to survive a nuclear strike. Officially, the Air Force has acknowledged only a handful: utility passages connecting hangars to maintenance shops, fuel lines encased in concrete conduits, and emergency shelters. But former personnel talk about more than that. One retired crew chief, who served at Loring in the 1960s, described a corridor that never ended, running parallel to the main runway but entirely underground. He said you could walk it for 15 minutes without hitting a door. Another airman recalled delivering parts to a room with no number that was guarded by 2 MPs and had no visible ventilation. When the base was decommissioned in 1994, much of the surface infrastructure was dismantled or repurposed, but the tunnels weren't filled in. Some entrances were welded shut, others were buried under gravel and concrete. The official redevelopment plans made no mention of them, yet every few years, someone claims to have found one. In 2003, a pair of local teenagers exploring the old fuel storage area stumbled into a half-collapsed stairwell. They followed it down into a narrow hallway lined with peeling white paint and rusted pipes. The air was damp, and their flashlights caught faded stenciling on the wall: S3C6. Before they could go far, a deep humming sound began, like a generator waking up, they later said, and they ran. When they returned the next day, the entrance was gone, sealed with fresh concrete. Skeptics argue that most of the so-called tunnels are just utility corridors or drainage culverts, the kind of thing any large installation would have. But there are details that don't fit. One civilian contractor who worked on demolition in the 90s claimed that his crew was ordered to pour concrete into a shaft they were told led to obsolete storage. Before they did, he looked down with a work light. The beam landed on what looked like a steel blast door, 20 feet below. The stories get stranger. A former air police officer says he was stationed in an underground post for a week during a training exercise in 1971. The location wasn't on any base map, and the only way in was via a locked elevator in one of the hangars. He describes 2 long corridors, painted green, with heavy doors leading to rooms full of radio equipment. The air was stale, the lights buzzed, and there was a constant vibration underfoot, as if machinery was running far below them. After the base closure, hunters and hikers who cross the property sometimes report hearing mechanical noises beneath the ground, a low drone that fades when you try to pinpoint it. In winter, when snow blankets the runways and most of the base is silent, they say you can see faint heat ripples rising from certain vents in the middle of empty fields. Whether the tunnels were meant for storage, secure movement of personnel, or something more secret, no complete blueprint has ever surfaced. Freedom of Information Act requests about subsurface structures at Loring AFB have been met with heavily redacted documents. Some pages are almost entirely blacked out. The Redevelopment Authority has turned parts of the base into an industrial park, a wind farm, and a training site. But vast sections remain abandoned, their chain-link fences sagging, warning signs rusting in place. Locals tell newcomers to stay away from the old weapons storage area, not because of danger, but because you never come back with the same story twice. If you stand at the edge of the old runway at dusk, with the Canadian woods stretching out behind you, it's hard to imagine the activity this place once saw. The bombers roaring overhead, the convoys moving under cover of darkness. But sometimes, if the wind is still, you might catch an echo from below, the hollow clang of a closing hatch, the metallic rattle of something shifting where no one has been in decades. The surface of Loring is empty now, but if the stories are true, the base has another life. One that still runs quietly in the dark, under the soil of Maine's northern border. By the winter of 1972, Loring Air Force Base had already built a reputation among the men stationed there. It wasn't just the bitter northern Maine cold or the isolation that wore on you. It was the way the base seemed to have corners that didn't quite exist on paper. Security police units were the ones who knew those corners best. They patrolled the perimeters at all hours, moving between the SAC alert area, the weapons storage site, and the stretches of dense spruce forest that wrapped the base like a black scarf. And, according to more than one veteran, sometimes they were sent underground. The tunnel patrol wasn't an official assignment. It never appeared on the daily duty roster. But on nights when the weather was at its worst, blizzards, freezing fog, ice storms, a select pair of men might be told to report to an auxiliary guard shack near the Western Fuel Depot. From there, they'd be escorted inside by an officer, through a blast-rated steel door and into a steep stairwell that dropped into the ground. The officer would lock the door behind them. One of those nights, in January 72, Staff Sergeant Robert Flynn and Airman First Class Daniel Haskett were assigned to that patrol. Flynn was a veteran of Vietnam, quiet and methodical. Haskett was barely 20, still adjusting to the bleak winters of Aroostook County. The snow was coming in sideways, the wind chill below zero, when they were last seen heading toward the West Side Fuel Depot. What happened next comes only from rumor, fragments of testimony, and a few strange entries in the security police blotter for that week. Entries that were later crossed out in heavy ink. Flynn and Haskett were expected to check in via radio every 30 minutes. Their first two calls came in on time, the audio thin and tinny as it echoed through the base network. The third call was late by 5 minutes, and when it came, it was just Flynn's voice. "We're hearing movement down here." The duty sergeant asked him to clarify, "Movement of what?" Flynn replied, "Not sure. It's not rats. It's steps." That was the last clear transmission. The official record says communication failure due to atmospheric interference. But other airmen on duty that night have said off the record that 2 more bursts came through before the line went dead. Haskett saying, "There's someone ahead," and Flynn shouting, "Stay back," followed by what one listener swore sounded like metal slamming on metal. A search party was organized at first light. For security police and 2 base engineers descended into the same entrance Flynn and Haskett had used. They found the first corridor intact, peeling paint, rusted pipes, condensation dripping from the ceiling. But about 200 yards in, the passage split into 3 branches. 2 of them ended abruptly at locked blast doors. The third curved away into darkness. They followed the curve for nearly half a mile before it ended in a steel door so heavy it took 2 men to pull it open. Beyond was another stairwell, this one going down. The air smelled stale, metallic. The engineers refused to go farther without proper breathing gear. The search was called off. Flynn and Haskett were never found. The Air Force listed them as AWOL, presumed desertion. Friends of the 2 men laughed bitterly at that. Where would they run? One said years later. It's 20 below, and you're surrounded by snow for miles. You don't walk out of here in a storm. In the years after Loring's closure, a few urban explorers claimed to have found the same stairwell described in the old stories. One said he went down 2 flights before hearing what sounded like footsteps below him, slow, deliberate, metallic. He turned back. When he tried to return with friends a week later, the entrance had been welded shut. Some locals believe the tunnels are still patrolled, not by airmen, but by something else, a maintenance crew of unknown origin, or perhaps an automated system still running decades after its purpose ended. Others say Flynn and Haskett stumbled into an area they weren't meant to see, one the Air Force sealed rather than explain. On still winter nights, Hunters in the woods north of the base say they've heard a faint tapping beneath the frozen ground, in patterns too regular to be natural. And sometimes, mixed with the wind, they think they hear a voice calling for backup, just a name, over and over, swallowed by the snow. Loring's surface lies silent now, but if you believe the veterans' whispers, the last patrol never really ended. It's still moving somewhere under the concrete. Two men keeping watch in a place that doesn't appear on any map. At the far eastern edge of Maine, where the tides rise and fall faster than you can track them and the Atlantic crashes against granite ledges, there's a place where the shoreline itself is inscribed with stories older than any town in New England. Machias Bay is a working stretch of water, lobster boats, scallop draggers, and weather-worn docks, but along its tidal flats, there are carvings that predate the arrival of Europeans by centuries, maybe millennia. They're called the Machias Bay petroglyphs, and they're among the most important and least understood archaeological sites in the state. The carvings are etched into bedrock that's only visible at low tide, meaning for half the day, the stories lie underwater. When the tide pulls back, the stone emerges slick and gleaming, the lines catching the sun at just the right angle. There are hundreds of figures scattered across several sites around the bay. Some are simple outlines of animals, moose, deer, fish, instantly recognizable. Others are human-like forms with outstretched arms, elongated bodies, and oddly proportioned heads. A few are geometric patterns, concentric circles, radiating lines, and shapes that look almost like maps. Archaeologists date many of them to at least 3,000 years ago, attributing them to the Passamaquoddy people, whose ancestors have lived along this coast for countless generations. But the petroglyphs are not uniform. Among the more familiar images are those that don't match any known Passamaquoddy or Wabanaki motifs. One recurring figure appears to be a man with no mouth, his arms bent sharply at the elbows, standing beside a tall, narrow shape that resembles a mast or a pole. Another shows a cluster of dots surrounding a spiral. Some researchers say it's a star map, though no one agrees on which stars. In the 19th century, local fishermen and mariners treated the carvings as curiosities. Some chalked them to the Indians. Others claimed they were marks left by early Norse or Basque visitors. A few even suggested they were navigation signs cut by a lost European ship, pointing to fresh water inland. The more fanciful insisted the geometric carvings were warnings, tide marks, showing where the ocean had once swallowed the land. The Passamaquoddy have their own traditions about the petroglyphs. In one telling, the carvings are records of alliances and journeys, each image tied to a clan or a great event. In another, they are not records at all, but speaking stones, places where spirits can see and be seen, the carvings acting as doors or mirrors between worlds. Elders say the figures are not meant to be interpreted by just anyone. They carry teachings that require a lifetime to understand. In recent decades, archaeologists have documented the carvings more carefully, photographing them under different light and tide conditions, even creating 3D scans. But there's a problem. The ocean is wearing them away. Each year, the tide grinds sand and ice across the bedrock, softening the lines. Some images that were clear in photographs from the 1970s are now barely visible. And then there are the stories of new carvings. In 2009, a local man walking the shore near Holmes Point claimed he saw a small figure, 3 feet tall, carved into a rock he'd never noticed before. It was shallow, the lines still sharp. He returned a week later to show his nephew, but the carving was gone. In its place was a patch of rock so smooth it looked as if it had been sanded. Passamaquoddy elders said the rock was closing itself. Archaeologists who inspected the site said the man had likely mistaken a shadow or seaweed pattern for a petroglyph. Still, the story spread. Some lobstermen say they've seen faint, glowing lines under the water on moonless nights, in the same patterns as the carvings. Others talk about strange echoes when the tide covers the rock, as if the waves hitting the shore are answered from beneath. One diver, checking lobster traps just offshore, swears he heard voices in a language he didn't understand, faint but rhythmic, like chanting. The petroglyph sites aren't marked with big signs. Those who know where they are keep the information close, partly to protect them from vandalism, partly out of respect. The stones belong to the tide, and the tide doesn't give up its secrets easily. If you go at low tide, you'll likely find yourself alone, the wind off the bay sharp in your lungs. You'll step carefully across the slick rock until the carvings start to emerge under your feet. Moose, deer, spirals, circles, the faint outline of a man with no mouth. You'll notice how quiet it gets when you crouch down to look closer, how even the gulls seem to hold their noise. And if you're unlucky, or lucky depending on your taste for mystery, you might realize the tide has turned while you were staring. The water will be moving back and fast, hissing over the carvings, and in minutes the stories will be gone again, back under the Atlantic, where they've waited for thousands of years. The petroglyphs of Machias Bay are old enough that even the tide seems to respect them, revealing their faces only for a few hours each day. But locals along this jagged stretch of Maine's eastern coast tell of something the archaeologists never write about. Symbols that appear where none existed before, linger for a short time, and then vanish without a trace. The first well-known account came after the storm of March 1962, a nor'easter that chewed at the coast for 3 days, stripping sand from coves and sending waves 20 feet high into the streets of Machiasport. When the tide finally pulled back, a group of lobstermen walking the flats near Holmes Point found a pattern cut into the bedrock they swore they had never seen. It wasn't like the older, weather-softened petroglyphs. These lines were sharp, almost fresh, 3 concentric circles with a straight channel cutting through the middle. They told themselves it had been there all along, hidden by barnacles or seaweed. But a month later, when they went to show the spot to a visiting cousin, it was gone. The bedrock was smooth, as if the carving had been polished away by 1,000 years of tide in a matter of weeks. Since then, similar reports have trickled in after big storms. A moose with antlers too wide for any real species. A human figure whose head is a cluster of rays, like the sun. A spiral that matched the shape of a dangerous offshore current known as the whirl. Some of these symbols were photographed, though never clearly, the glare off wet rock, the motion of the tide blurring the lines. Others survive only in sketches passed between neighbors. The Passamaquoddy elders have their own interpretation. The tide is a messenger. When it tears away the surface of the shore, it sometimes uncovers things meant for a particular generation to see. Once the message is given, the ocean takes it back. Stone can close like a fist, one elder said. You are not meant to hold it. Not all the appearances are tied to storms. In the summer of 1987, a visiting anthropology student claimed to have found a new carving on a rock ledge near Birch Point, a pattern of 7 small circles connected by lines, like a constellation. She mapped its position and took detailed rubbings. When she returned 3 days later, the design was gone, replaced by a wide crack in the stone. Locals told her she must have mistaken an old carving for something new, but the rubbings show a precision not found in any documented Machias Bay glyphs. And then there's the tide itself. Several fishermen have reported seeing faint, glowing lines under the water at night, tracing out shapes identical to the carvings on shore. They say the glow is not like phosphorescence, which flickers when disturbed, but a steady pale light that holds for minutes before fading. One lobsterman swears he saw a new pattern appear this way, in the shallows during a neap tide, a man with no mouth standing beside a tall, narrow shape. By morning, there was nothing in the rock. Skeptics point to the changing nature of the shoreline. The tides here are fierce, moving as much as 20 vertical feet in a single cycle. The constant grind of sand, ice, and water can reveal old carvings that have been buried for centuries, and just as quickly erase them. A new glyph may be nothing more than an ancient one briefly exposed. But that doesn't explain the most unsettling stories, the ones about hearing voices while standing over the designs. In 2004, a photographer from Bangor set out to document the Machias Bay petroglyphs at sunrise. Low tide gave her nearly 2 hours on the flats. While crouched over a sharp-lined spiral she'd never seen in any reference book, she began to hear something beneath the sound of the wind, a low murmur, like several people speaking at once just beyond the edge of hearing. She thought it was the tide coming back and over distant rocks, but when she looked up, the waterline was still yards away. She packed her gear and left. By the time she returned with a guide that afternoon, the carving was gone. There's no official catalog of these tide symbols. Archaeologists working in the area focus on preserving what is undeniably ancient. The fleeting images, The ones that come and go are considered distractions, unprovable, undocumented, outside the scope of serious study. But for the people who live here, they're part of the same continuum. The stones speak when they choose, and the tide decides who listens. If you visit Machias Bay after a storm, keep an eye on the flats as the water pulls back. You might see nothing but wet rock and the usual, time-worn figures. Or you might see something else. A carving too crisp, too perfect to have survived centuries of tide, staring back at you in the morning sun. You'll have only a few hours before the ocean returns to claim it, and maybe that's the point. Some messages aren't meant to be kept, only witnessed. On the southern coast of Maine, where Casco Bay opens wide to the Atlantic, the small fishing town of Harpswell holds tight to a legend that's older than most of its houses. It's a story of a ship built for speed, a crew eager for glory, and a disappearance that left behind a ghost the locals swear still sails the bay on certain winter nights. The ship was called the Dash, a topsail schooner built in Portland in 1813, during the height of the War of 1812. She was long and narrow, with sharp lines that cut through the water like a blade. The Dash was a privateer, armed and fast, intended to outrun British blockades and capture enemy merchant ships before they could flee. Her home port was Harpswell, and her captain, John Porter, was a young but daring seaman who'd already built a reputation for slipping through impossible gaps in the Royal Navy's patrols. The Dash quickly became a local legend. In just over a year, she captured at least a dozen British vessels and brought their cargo back to Maine. Her crew swore she could make the trip from Harpswell to the West Indies and back in record time, outrunning anything that dared to chase her. People said she carried a wind in her sails that no other ship could catch. Then came January 1815. The war was winding down, though news traveled slowly in those days. The Dash was anchored off Bailey Island, taking on supplies for another run. Her orders were to sail south, meet up with another privateer, and harass British shipping off the Carolinas. But a storm was brewing in the Gulf of Maine, the kind that made even seasoned captains stay in harbor. Captain Porter, however, had a reputation for tempting fate. Witnesses on shore saw the Dash weigh anchor just after dawn on January 14th. She sailed straight into the gathering gale, her sails full, her hull cutting through waves that already had white caps. By nightfall, the storm had closed in completely. The Dash never returned. When the storm cleared 2 days later, fishermen scanned the horizon for her masts. Search vessels combed Casco Bay and beyond, but no wreckage was ever found. No splintered timbers, no floating barrels, no bodies washed ashore. It was as if the schooner had been swallowed whole by the sea. Then, the sightings began. The first came only weeks after the disappearance. A lobsterman hauling traps near Halfway Rock claimed he saw a schooner flying full sail in a dead calm. She passed within 100 yards of his dory, her decks empty, her rigging silent. He swore it was the Dash, the same paint on the hull, the same sharp bow, but when he turned to follow her course, she was gone. Over the years, dozens of similar reports have trickled in, always in winter, always in rough weather. Fishermen say they see her cresting a wave just ahead of a squall, her sails impossibly white against the gray sea. Sometimes she vanishes behind a curtain of snow. Sometimes she simply fades from sight, as though slipping into another world. In Harpswell, the ghost of the Dash became a warning to sailors. If you see her, turn back. The superstition says she appears only to those about to meet the same fate, lured into the storm by a phantom that can never make port. Historians have tried to explain the sightings. They say most are misidentifications, another schooner seen at a strange angle, or a trick of light on the water. Some suggest the Dash hit a reef and sank instantly, her wreck still hidden somewhere in the deep trenches off Casco Bay. But the absence of debris has kept the legend alive. Every January, on the anniversary of her last voyage, locals gather on Bailey Island to watch the water. Most years, there's nothing but waves and wind. But in 1995, a reporter from Portland swore she caught a glimpse through her telephoto lens, a white triangle of sail cutting across the bay, vanishing as the shutter clicked. The photo, when printed, showed nothing but spray. On nights when the snow falls heavy and the wind turns the sea into slate, you can stand on the Harpswell shore and imagine it. A sleek schooner racing through the dark, crewless, bound for nowhere, forever running with a wind that no living sailor can catch. Just off the mouth of the Kennebec River, where the Atlantic pounds against dark granite ledges, Seguin Island rises abruptly from the water. It's small, barely 65 acres, but its steep slopes and solitary lighthouse have guided sailors for more than 2 centuries. On a clear day, Seguin is easy to spot, a green hump in the blue, crowned by its 53-foot white tower. But there are mariners, past and present, who swear that in certain conditions, the island isn't there at all. They'll sail the exact coordinates, expecting to see the lighthouse beam or the curve of its rocky shore, only to find nothing but open sea. And then, without warning, it's back, sometimes right beside them. The first written account of Seguin's vanishing act comes from 1873, when Captain Elias Crowley of Bath reported that he passed through the Kennebec Channel with no sight of Seguin, though the weather was calm and visibility was fair. His crew backed him up. They said the island appeared only after they were halfway to Booth Bay, suddenly looming behind them as if it had been there all along. The incident was logged but dismissed as navigational error. Since then, there have been dozens of similar reports, not only from fishermen and sailors, but from Coast Guard crews, ferry operators, even pilots flying over Casco Bay. The stories are always the same. A patch of sea where Seguin should be, nothing on the horizon, and then, moments or hours later, the island is simply there. Locals have explanations, depending on who you ask. Some say it's nothing but fog, the dense, rolling banks that can form and dissipate in minutes along the Maine coast. Others speak of tide mirages, rare atmospheric refractions that can make land vanish or appear displaced. A few, though, take a darker view. Seguin disappears because it wants to. That belief ties into the island's long history of hauntings. The most famous is the story of the lighthouse keeper's piano. In the mid-1800s, a keeper bought his young wife a piano to ease her loneliness. She learned only one song, which she played over and over until her husband, driven mad, destroyed the instrument, and her with an axe. Visitors and keepers since have reported hearing faint piano music on stormy nights, drifting over the water. Then there's the Lantern Man, a figure in an oilskin coat carrying a swinging light along the island's high ground. Keepers claim to see him on foggy nights, moving against the wind. His light never reached the shore, and no one could find footprints the next day. In the 1980s, a lobsterman named Charlie Morse experienced both phenomena in a single night. He was hauling traps near Seguin when a sudden bank of fog rolled in. The island vanished completely. No beam from the lighthouse, no outline against the moon. As he tried to navigate by compass, he heard piano music faint over the engine noise. It grew louder until it seemed to come from directly beneath his hull. The fog lifted moments later, revealing Seguin less than a quarter-mile away. Charlie swore it hadn't been there a second earlier. Coast Guard logs record strange radar anomalies near the island, echoes that suggest land shifting or flickering in and out. Technicians blame equipment glitches, but sailors still trade warnings. If Seguin disappears while you're watching, change course. Something is wrong with the water then. Some old-timers say there's a rock ledge just south of the island, unmarked on any chart, that appears only when Seguin is gone. No one's managed to prove it. No one wants to be the one to find it the hard way. On certain nights in late autumn, when the moon is thin and the tide pulls hard out of the Kennebec, you can stand on Popham Beach and look for the island's beam. Most nights, it flashes like clockwork. But if you're unlucky, there will be nothing, just a sweep of dark ocean, as if the lighthouse, the keeper's house, and the whole island have slipped beneath the waves. And then, when you look again, Seguin will be back, the beam turning slow and steady, as though it never left at all. Route 182 is a lonely stretch of Tulane blacktop that cuts through the forested hills between Cherryfield and Franklin. It's known to locals as the Black's Woods Road, a twisting, remote pass where pine trees crowd so close they blot out the sky, and moose sometimes wander across the asphalt without warning. On clear days, it's scenic. At night, it feels endless. Truckers and late-night drivers all know the same unwritten rule. If you see a hitchhiker out here, you don't stop. Not because it's dangerous in the usual way, but because of her. The earliest accounts date back to the 1950s, when Route 182 was little more than a narrow ribbon of pavement through the wilderness. Drivers started reporting a young woman walking along the shoulder at night. She wore a pale dress, her hair dark and wet, and she held one arm close to her body like it was injured. If you pulled over, she would silently climb into the passenger seat, give you a name, Mary, sometimes Marie, and ask for a ride to Franklin. For the first few miles, she would sit quietly, staring out the window. Then, without warning, she would turn her head and say something strange. One driver swore she whispered, "I never made it home." Another claimed she asked, "Do you hear the water?" before vanishing, not stepping out, not opening the door, just gone. When these stories first circulated, most people dismissed them as backwoods tall tales. But over the decades, the reports stayed consistent. Different drivers, different years, always the same route, always the same description. And then came the detail that cemented the legend. Many who saw her later learned that a young woman named Mary Norton had drowned in nearby Fox Pond in 1935 after a car accident on the old road. The accident happened on a rain-slick night. Mary was a passenger in a car heading toward Franklin when the driver lost control on a curve. The vehicle left the road, rolled down an embankment, and landed in the pond. The driver survived. Mary did not. Locals say the curve was later straightened during road improvements, but the spot still carries a chill, and it's not far from where most sightings begin. Some encounters are brief. A driver will pass her walking and glance in the rearview mirror, only to find the road empty. Others are more unnerving. In 1982, a man driving to Machiasport at midnight claimed the woman was suddenly in his car, sitting in the passenger seat without a sound. She looked at him once, then back to the road, and was gone within seconds. Law enforcement has never officially acknowledged the hitchhiker, but state troopers have their own stories. One retired officer admitted in an interview that he picked her up during a rainstorm in the late 70s. She gave him an address in Franklin. When he reached it, she had vanished, leaving the seatbelt still buckled. The house, he discovered, had been her family's decades earlier. People who've encountered her often mention the smell of damp earth or pond water lingering in the car afterward. Some say their radios cut out or headlights dim when she's near. One man swore that after his encounter, he found wet footprints in the bed of his pickup that led nowhere. Skeptics insist the legend survives because Route 182 is remote, dark, and unnerving on its own. A tired driver's mind can play tricks in the mist and headlight glare. But even they admit there's something strange about how many of the stories match, right down to the way she disappears. On quiet nights, if you drive the Blacks Woods Road between Cherryfield and Franklin, you might see nothing but the dark wall of pines and the occasional glint of a deer's eyes. Or, maybe, just ahead in the high beams, you'll see her, a young woman in a pale dress, walking with her head down, looking for a ride she never finishes. On a high bluff above the Penobscot River, the gray granite walls of Fort Knox look as solid and unyielding as the day they were laid in the mid-1800s. Built to protect Maine's interior from potential British naval attacks, the fort never saw a single battle. Yet for a place that never fired in anger, it carries an unsettling weight, a sense that something within those stone corridors still watches. Construction began in 1844, and the work was grueling. Masons and laborers lived in temporary barracks, chipping away at the granite ledges that would become the fort's foundation. Many were immigrants, poorly paid, and working in dangerous conditions. Accidents were common. A block slipping from a crane, a worker falling from the high walls, a sudden cave-in in the powder magazine tunnels. Though few official records exist, locals whispered about the bodies quietly buried in unmarked graves on the slope below the fort. By the time Fort Knox was completed, its purpose had already begun to fade. The Civil War came and went without a single British warship threatening Maine. The fort's garrison shrank to a skeleton crew, and much of the structure sat in silence, its echoing casemates gathering dust. Soldiers stationed there complained of hearing footsteps in the empty hallways, of lanterns swinging in the dark when no one was inside. One of the earliest recorded ghost stories comes from the 1870s, when a night watchman swore he encountered a uniformed soldier in one of the powder rooms. The man stood rigid at attention, his face pale, his eyes fixed straight ahead. When the watchman stepped closer, the soldier dissolved into the shadows against the granite wall. During World War I, Fort Knox was briefly reactivated as a training site. Recruits told of cold drafts sweeping through sealed corridors, of disembodied voices giving muffled commands, and of the sound of boots marching in perfect rhythm, always coming from the lower tunnels, where no one was assigned. A few claimed to see a man in a Civil War-era coat, pacing the parapets at night. In the decades after the fort was decommissioned for good, it became a public historic site and a magnet for paranormal investigators. Visitors often report strange sensations, the feeling of being followed in the long, vaulted hallways, whispers in the gun casemates, and sudden chills near the old officers' quarters. One ranger who's worked at the fort for more than 20 years tells a story he refuses to repeat on record. He says he was locking up after a summer tour when he heard the unmistakable sound of a bugle from the parade ground. Stepping outside, he saw a group of soldiers in formation, faint, almost transparent, their uniforms from another century. They stood at attention for a full 10 seconds before fading into the night air. The bugle stopped mid-note. Thermal imaging cameras used by investigators have captured unexplained heat signatures in the powder magazines, where temperatures are usually a steady 50 degrees. EVP recordings pick up murmured orders, the clank of metal, and once, a voice whispering, "Hold the line." Skeptics attribute the activity to the fort's acoustics, sound bouncing unpredictably off stone, wind creating odd harmonics in the tunnels. But there's one detail harder to explain: the shadow guard. Multiple visitors have described the same figure, a tall man in dark clothing who stands at the sally port, blocking the exit. He's seen mostly in late afternoon, when the light is dim in the archway. If you walk toward him, he seems to step aside, but when you turn back, the entrance behind you is empty. On quiet evenings, when the crowds are gone and the river flows black and silent below, Fort Knox feels like a place caught between times. Its walls may never have faced an enemy fleet, but they've absorbed something else. The weight of unfinished duty, the echo of orders that will never be obeyed, and the restless watch of soldiers who never left their post. In the remote western mountains of Maine, Flagstaff Lake stretches wide and still, its surface often smooth as glass. It's a peaceful place now, favored by anglers, kayakers, and campers, but beneath its dark waters lies the ghost of a village that no longer exists. That village was Flagstaff, a small but tight-knit logging and farming community founded in the early 1800s. For more than a century, it sat along the dead river, its homes, church, school, and general store clustered around a dusty main road. In winter, the air smelled of wood smoke. In summer, the scent of fresh-cut pine drifted from the mills. Everything changed in the 1940s, when the Central Maine Power Company announced plans to build the Long Falls Dam. The dam would create a massive reservoir, Flagstaff Lake, to generate hydroelectric power for the region. The problem was that the lake would also swallow the entire village. The residents fought the project at first, but resistance was brief. Eminent domain was invoked, property was bought out, and the slow dismantling began. Families moved away, taking with them whatever could be salvaged. Buildings that weren't moved were burned down, their ashes cleared before the waters came. The cemetery on the hill was exhumed, coffins relocated to higher ground. Though some locals claim not every grave was moved. By 1950, the dam was complete, and the dead river began to rise. Within weeks, what remained of Flagstaff was gone. The streets, the foundations, the last stubborn fence posts, all drowned under 30 feet of water. From shore, you could sometimes see the tops of dead trees still standing where front yards had been. It didn't take long for the stories to start. Fishermen claimed their anchors snagged on rooftops. Divers exploring the lake bottom in the 1960s reported finding entire cellar holes, stone walls intact, with rusted farm equipment still in place. One said he swam into the remains of the general store and saw glass jars lined neatly on a shelf, their contents long since clouded into murk. Then came the tales of the voices. Campers along the shore tell of waking at night to hear church bells faintly ringing from somewhere across the water. Others hear the low rumble of wagon wheels on dirt, though the nearest road is miles away. On windless mornings, a thin fog sometimes curls off the surface, and those drifting through it in boats swear they hear the sounds of hammering, a dog barking, or children laughing. In 1993, A group of college students diving near the old village center claimed they found a schoolhouse foundation. Inside, they swore, was a desk still upright with a child's slate resting on top. The slate, one diver said, had faint chalk marks that dissolved the moment he touched them. Locals who've lived near Flagstaff Lake their whole lives say the water is colder in certain spots, unnaturally so, and that when you pass over them, your boat seems to slow, as if something beneath is holding you. Some refuse to swim there at all, especially at night, when the moonlight reflects off the water in a way that looks, they say, like old roads shining just below the surface. Skeptics chalk it all up to nostalgia, to the way people can't let go of what's been lost. But there's no denying that the bones of the village remain down there, preserved in the cold silt. And for those who believe, Flagstaff isn't gone, it's just waiting. On certain misty mornings, if you're quiet and the water is perfectly still, you might look down from your canoe and see shapes. A fence line, a cellar door, the faint outline of a steeple. Blink, and it's gone. But if you stay long enough and listen carefully, you might just hear the faint ring of a bell, calling the village to Sunday service, even after 70 years beneath the lake.